that are very, very overvalued and very dangerous. Gregory Mannarino, someone who I follow consistently, just sold all of his stocks today, very high risk. And it's like what we're talking about. You have all of these indicators saying flashing red. You have, the insider selling. You have massive euphoria. You have all of this stuff going on, but no one's eyeing precious metals. And I think that's on the horizon.
Why are the world's most powerful nations hoarding gold like never before? What secret are European banks and BRICS nations hiding about the future of money? Andy Schectman drops bombshell revelations about a global power shift that could shake the very foundation of the financial system. You won't believe what's coming next. Watch closely because this could change everything.
No question about it. And look, I'll go back to 2019. Why the hell would the BIS have reclassified gold the only other tier one asset in the world? Why? They wouldn't have unless it was important. Why are all the European banks accumulating gold? And as a percentage of gold to their GDP, it's almost identical. It's almost like they're preparing for a gold revaluation. And look at the amount of gold that all the BRICS nations are buying. And I think that's prerequisite for a seat at the table. And being let, Saudi Arabia tried to buy it without reporting to the IMF. China's been doing it, and buying all the doré, being less than forthright. Russia's not telling us. China's the second largest producer of silver in the world and now a net importer after being a net exporter. If the People's Liberation Army buys instead of the PBOC, they don't report it. The doré and concentrate's not reported. I just happen to think that these countries are putting a floor for sure under the price of gold and silver, and it's been admirable, if you will, in the way that they've constructed it. They're continuing. Look at India. India's buying record amounts of gold right now, and they've bought over 900 million ounces of silver in the last 4 years. That's more than that's on the LBMA. So, when you talk about putting a floor under it, you're absolutely right. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to hold through the night because the bullion banks are pretty tough, but gold's up $18 right now in the aftermarket after getting hit. This is just another way for these countries to go ahead, hit it. We'll stand for delivery. We'll push it right back up, and we don't care what you do with the price because in the end, we're going to take delivery, and that's how they win until they no longer allow deliveries, and that's when the exchanges move eastward. And it's funny because the the BRICS grain exchange, which it's a good analogy. The guy that's developing it said, we consume and produce more wheat than the West does, but we don't control the price. It's done on COMEX. But when the BRICS grain exchange is completed, that will change. And now they're talking about a BRICS metals exchange. They understand that the COMEX controls the price and that it is the tail wagging the dog. And so they're using, if you can't beat them, join them, fine. So do the same thing. And that's what they're doing. And standing for delivery is how you beat them. And you join them in not complaining about it, maybe even shorting the paper price yourself. And I think that's the game that will happen until it doesn't. And look, if the central banks weren't buying to the degree that they were, then you might have reason to be slightly concerned. If gold hadn't been reclassified the only other tier one asset, I would be less than confident as I am. And I just happen to believe that this is a long game that is being perpetuated against the West, and we're stupid enough to play into it. And people are too obsessed with other shiny things to notice it's happening right out in front of us. And, it's easy for me to talk about this in a market that doesn't hold Bitcoin's jock in terms of its performance. But in the end, the central banks are buying precious metals, and you don't hear about them, some of them, but all of them. You don't hear about them building Bitcoin strategic reserves like Trump is talking about. But what's the one thing that even Cynthia Lummis, the congresswoman from Wyoming, talked about in her bill that's been submitted to fund the strategic Bitcoin account is to revalue the price of gold, and to do so with some of the profits, use it to buy the Bitcoin. It's the same thing that the head of the Dutch National Bank is saying. And I guarantee you, when you look at the amount of gold that's evened out across the entire European Central Bank balance sheet complex, that's all almost exactly the same in terms of relation to gold to GDP. It's as if they are preparing for some sort of revaluation. So it's not that I'm a Bitcoin hater. It could very well be an asset for the state, but it won't back a currency system because it's too volatile. That's what gold will do. And so ultimately, this has to be done in a slow, orderly fashion, and that is what is happening. And silver will come along for the ride. It won't be linear, and it'll probably be far more violent in its move, and it will happen when people least expect it. We'll all expect it because we've seen it, but it'll catch the majority of the investing world completely off guard because they don't legitimize what's happening, no matter how blatant and obvious it is. People who say, why, if there's a shortage, why are we able to get coins? The market's been much slower than it's been over the last 3-4 years. And there is a risk on vibe. Look, I think the euphoria that people are feeling is justified. I mean, we've lived through really 4 crazy years, and I don't think it changes where this ultimately goes. And what it's really done is push money into all of these risk-on assets that are very, very overvalued and very dangerous right now in terms of, like Gregory Mannarino, someone who I follow consistently, just sold all of his stocks today, all of them, because his MMRI is in the territory of very high risk. And it's like what we're talking about. You have all of these indicators saying flashing red. You have, the insider selling. You have massive euphoria. You have all of this stuff going on, but no one's eyeing precious metals. And so they're kind of just sitting there in terms of the retail aspect. And I just think that if you see a bank failure, and I think that's on the horizon, we're not out of the woods yet with the banks. You see a problem with the banks, and people wake up to a realization, whether it be David Rogers Webb, great taking, and everything held at the DTCC, whether it be the massive overvaluation in the market where the breadth is at all-time worst level ever, where all of the concentration is in a handful of stocks, or 7 trillion in the money markets. It wouldn't take but one very scary, dirty event to just like that push people into precious metals, and there isn't enough supply out there to handle even a modest increase by the public, which would then push premiums right back up. These premiums are on par with what I've seen the majority of my career. Everything, with maybe the exception of the Silver Eagle, which still have slightly elevated premiums, not horrible, but slightly. Everything else is pretty much on par with what I sold it for the majority of my career, much of which was in the midst of a bear market. That's when those banks were bailed out illegally. And the Dodd-Frank Act says those banks need to be bailed in. Now, little itty bitty bank in Lindsay, Oklahoma that failed was bailed in. They only had $7 million in uninsured deposits, not the few billion that Silicon Valley Bank had, Oprah's money and tech startup money, and they got all of it back. Silicon Valley Bank in flyover country, Oklahoma, was bailed in. Half of the uninsured deposits are gone. So if you had $1 million in there, you get 250,000, the FDIC, that leaves 750 uninsured. 375 of that you get, and that's what the FDIC did. That makes 6.25 out of $1 million. That other 375 is gone. And there's not a word about it. And this is why people haven't freaked out. If that had been a big bank, like a big regional bank, Truist Bank or US Bank or any of these large regional banks, it would be Armageddon like that. And it's funny that the banks that were illegally bailed out, there was lots of news coverage of it. And the other banks that subsequently failed were gobbled up by other regional banks. And so no one lost anything. And so that's why it just quietly evaporated.
This isn't just another market update. This is your wake-up call. What's happening in gold and silver today will define the future of global power. Are you ready to adapt, or will you be caught off guard? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more explosive insights. The time to understand the game is now. Don't miss out.